I'm Dana Perino, and this is Perino on Politics. Welcome to Perino on Politics, where we give you a 30,000-foot view of everything you need to know this week in politics. I'm Dana Perino, and joining me this week to discuss all of this and more is my friend, Jessica Anderson. Jessica is the founding president of the Sentinel Action Fund. She previously served as Associate Director of Intergovernmental Affairs and Strategic Initiatives at the Office of Management and Budget, also known as OMB. That was under President Trump. And she was formerly the executive director of Heritage Action. So she knows her way around politics, DC. She's also a young mom and appears on America's Newsroom, which we enjoy having her there. Jessica, welcome.
Thanks, Dana. Great to be here today.
Thank you so much. Okay, so let's talk presidential politics first, but Caroline's going to bring me a coffee in case you caught that on air. So this week we have the Nevada caucus and primary, but I just read a Politico headline that said Nevada doesn't matter. So I think basically it's because the Nevada Republican Party was like, here, one person's in a caucus, one person's in a primary. It doesn't necessarily matter because it's a small number of delegates. Are you even paying any attention to Nevada this week?
Ish, which isn't a great answer, but the truth is that Nevada is trying to wiggle its way into being one of the top 4 states. You know, this is a result of the state legislature's moves to move them further up in the caucus timeline. And so I think everybody is like, oh, wait, Nevada's now? It's not after South Carolina like normal. So there's that. But I also think Nikki has not really done anything to focus on the state. And so her eyes have turned to South Carolina. Trump's talking about South Carolina. So I think Trump wins it single-handedly without much competition. And now we just focus on the Palmetto State. Tell
you what, Nikki Haley has raised a lot of money in January. Yeah. Her New Hampshire and Iowa wins were apparently, pretty good in the fundraising department. And one of the things that a lot of people have pointed out, myself included, as if I sounded like I really knew what I was talking about, is that often campaigns end because they run out of money. And a lot of people are like, why don't you just drop out now? You're obviously not going to win. But she has money. She was on SNL for a brief appearance over the weekend. And so she's not going to drop out. I do think she stays in through Super Tuesday. At least.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think she stays in. It's not just that she has money, it's the type of money. Right. So one of the things she announced over the weekend was that over 60% of the donations that came in January were grassroots small dollar. So that's something that historically Trump has dominated, the low dollar, the grassroots dollar. And Nikki's racking those in as well. And so I think she's going to use that as an example that she's got general voter support amongst the grassroots and can go toe to toe with Trump in South Carolina.
One thing I noticed as I listened to this one podcast called Start Here. It's an ABC News product. When they were talking about President Biden's primary win on Saturday in South Carolina, the reporter, she said that one of the things she paid attention to was how very low the turnout was, even though the Democrats spent a lot of money to try to get turnout pumped up in South Carolina. Do you think turnout was low because it was kind of a foregone conclusion that Biden would win, or does that signify some sort of lack of enthusiasm that we've been seeing in the polls more broadly about Biden's reelection?
I think there's something more deeper going on with the Biden campaign. I mean, the truth is he doesn't have the enthusiasm from the far left, right? They wanted him to be more liberal than he is. The moderates are disappointed that he hasn't followed through on any of his commitments. And you look poll after poll and he's upside down on the border, on spending, on the economy, on crime. And there's just really
mental
nothing.
Acuity or mental competency. I think that's how they put it.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, that came up in almost all the polls that came out over this last week was just competence. Like, they're actually starting on the Democratic side to poll whether or not you believe Biden is competent. His numbers are down. Kamala Harris's are way worse. And so I think there's an element of just disarray amongst the Democratic base right now. And that is just going to bleed lower turnout levels. They're going to have to do a lot, I think, to get their people to turn out. I would be on the lookout for a lot of these kind of gimmicks. We saw this with the free college gimmick from Governor Whitmer in Michigan. I think we're going to see more of Hollywood surrogates come out to his defense. It's not going to be a traditional stump speech campaign for him. One, because He's very old. He can't even, carry kind of that normal schedule that you would see from a campaign cadence standpoint. And I think he's going to have a lot of surrogates in front of him, talking about him, trying to reinforce him, and there's just not a lot of enthusiasm.
You saw that last week with Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, basically being tapped as the guy that's going to go out and do all these interviews for him, but he's not the commander-in-chief. And one of the things that a commander-in-chief is given the opportunity to do every year is to do an interview right before the Super Bowl. Now, this is a huge opportunity. The Super Bowl could get up to 100 or maybe 125 million people watching it. That interview, let's say before people tune in, let's say it's 55 million people even. That's the biggest audience a president could possibly have. President Trump didn't do every single year. I think he maybe missed 2 of them. Biden didn't do it last year. I thought that was partly because it was a Fox interview, even though I think, let's say it was Shannon Bream. You can't do an interview with Shannon Bream. Give me a break. Right. It might be tough, but, she's kind and give you a chance to talk. I'm actually okay with this tradition going away because I think people do want to focus on the football game, but I also believe that his campaign team knows that the risk of failing in front of 55 million people or more for an interview like that, it wasn't worth it for them. That's why I think they're taking a knee, so to speak. That's a sports term, in case anybody didn't know.
Yeah, I think that's right, Dana. But I also think you really can't replace the number of eyeballs that you would get from a Super Bowl, right? This is one of the most high-profile sporting events. It's already politicized. I completely hear you. I wish it wasn't. But as soon as you had the entire movement of not standing for the pledge and you had BLM, and now you have Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift and all of that pop culture now thrown in the midst, football is no longer football for football's sake, right? When my 10-year-old watches it, he's seen everything else. We have to talk about everything else, not just the plays. And so I think
the NFL's done a pretty good job of getting that behind them, though. And I don't think the NFL brought the Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift craziness on itself, even though they're dealing with the aftermath.
They're embracing it, right?
Yeah, sure.
Their
why
numbers
not? They want more young girls to buy merch.
Yeah, they're appreciating the extra eyeballs, right? The Grammys, I watched only a little bit of it last night. I don't know how much of it you caught. And it was actually really funny when they were like, okay, in so much as the NFL pans to Taylor, we're going to pan to football players in the Grammys studio, in the Grammys live audience tonight. And then they did that 2 or 3 times to former football players that were at the Grammys.
That's funny.
I think everyone is just trying to build on the last big moment because they're just trying to drive eyeballs, which, as we know, drives advertisers, which drives the bucks for the execs.
One thing Ben Shapiro said last week on his podcast that I really appreciated was how you cannot make yourself famous because you get an endorsement of a famous person.
Yeah.
And so it's stop trying so hard. For the Biden administration, putting it out there that they're really hoping to get the Taylor endorsement, which they probably will. She endorsed him in 2020. She had cookies and everything. But it's probably not going to matter. What does certainly matter is the border. And last week you had these several migrants beat up a couple of cops in Times Square, NYPD officers. They were then, several of them left town after they were not required to stay, didn't even have to post bail. And then you had another of them walking out of court, give the double bird to America on his way out. What's interesting is that, Jessica, you never know what story might be the one that the media latches onto more broadly. But this one, I feel like, is doing that. It's almost the perfect metaphor for the Biden administration's policies on the border. I want you to talk about that and about the Senate bill that has just come out. I know that you cover the Senate quite extensively. You know it well. The Speaker of the House says it is dead on arrival, so I guess it might not go anywhere, but it was an attempt, at least, to try to put something on paper to see what we could agree on.
Mm-hmm. Well, first and foremost, I think every single day we have a new depressing and just horrific story coming across the border. And when we've been saying for 2+ years now that it's not just a national security crisis, it's a humanitarian one, you actually saw that with the visuals coming out of New York this last week. And these images are powerful, and they were so powerful that many people can't look away. And they shouldn't, because this is what's happening to our cities. And it's the result of these broken and failed policies, not just at the border, but in the interior too. New York's a sanctuary city. They've said, send people here. Well, they don't have the infrastructure, and they have a DA that's refusing to prosecute crime. And so when you don't have deterrence, like you don't have in many of our major blue cities across the country, you're just going to have a cycle of repetitive crimes and a complete lack of just support or even respect for the law. And it was just so blatant with how he gave the bird to the cameras. It was just so it was just in your face. It was like what you expect from like a teenager. And, you look at his age, he's a kid. I mean, he's not really a kid, but he's young. It's not this is young. So I think that's one. I truly hope for the sake of our country that moments like this actually wake the left up, right? The border is an issue that's affecting every single American, regardless of partisanship. And it's so bad now. And it's on nearly every news site. And you see it and you feel it, and you're concerned. So I am hopeful that there's a turning point.
It's interesting I haven't read the full text of the bill, but I read a lot of the background documents on it. What I think is interesting is I know that a lot of people that would consider themselves conservatives on the right are saying this bill's terrible, it's not good enough. What I think is interesting is how much the Republican negotiator was able to get Senate Democrats to agree to. I mean, some of the things are just pretty amazing that they weren't even in law already. For example, you could be immediately denied asylum if you have a criminal record in this new bill. Do you know that that's not law now, which is so bizarre? The progressive left is pretty upset about the bill as well. Again, I don't know if it goes anywhere, but we will pay attention to it as it continues to go on. And also, the Speaker of the House was fairly smart, I think, strategically in peeling off support for this bill, but still supporting our ally Israel and doing a standalone bill there. So we'll pay attention to all of that as it moves along, and we'll be right back with another segment. All right, Jessica, we are back with Perino on Politics. Jessica Anderson is my guest. One of the things that happened this week, in addition to the NBC poll that came out, is that you started to see perhaps some improvement in the economy on the numbers. So like on the jobs number, for example, looks pretty good, right? Still, inflation is up, wages starting to go up, government spending still very high. And I wonder what you think about this idea that the Biden administration thinks it just might be able to win re-election because of the improving economy. What do you hear either on the policy front or even in your own circles?
Well, what I hear from grassroots Americans, which is primarily who I talk to across the country, it's not going to be enough. So the reality is, even if the numbers start to have movement this month, February, 9-10 months before the election, it's not going to we're not going to feel it, right? And voters make decisions based upon what they feel. They feel the price at the pump. They feel the cost of groceries. They know the tuition for their kids' schools. And that is going to take time for any changes to be long-term and for any of those changes to be durable. I mean, I don't know that we're actually fully feeling the economic impact of the IRA, Biden's tax bill that he passed and that got through Congress just last year. That spending palooza isn't actually fully realized in our pocketbooks yet. So at some point, all of this just doubles down for the American consumer, and we're not able to actually catch our breath. And I think that's going to be the story, this cycle. It's going to be immigration and crime, and it's going to be the economy. And those two issues, Biden cannot run a positive message on because his hand was directly involved in those two issues going so poorly the last 3 years.
What's interesting is also because housing costs are not coming down, interest rates are not coming down, at least right now. And the stock market might be up, but for a younger couple looking to figure out a way to buy a home for their own shelter, they don't want to spend 50% of their income on shelter. And then you add the high cost of home insurance and car insurance, both of those going up quite dramatically, partly because of crime on the car scene, like carjackings, for example, in the nation's capital are outrageous. And I pay a lot of attention to this issue of the high cost of childcare. I know you're a young mom, and so just having your youthful outlook on all of this, what do you make of how people think of the economy when you take into account those three big issues?
Well, I think one thing that's really, really important here to remember is that moms are making the same decisions for childcare as they're making for groceries, as they're making for sports camps, as they're making for all their extracurricular activities for their family. And so, there was always this common thought in the political sphere 30 years ago that you could kind of put moms' issues in a bucket and it was just education. Well, now they're making the financial decisions in their household because they're paying the bills and they're making sure that their kids are being well cared for, and there's a cost for that. Also, access to childcare continues to not be improved, and so you're having to not only look at the costs, but you're looking at what is the level of care, what is the level of schooling, and now you add in the woke kind of trend lines that we're seeing even in things as young as kindergarten, where parents are like, I'm not going to send my kid to a public school where they're going to get indoctrinated and have sexualized material in front of them at the age of 6. So there's a lot of, I think, dynamic and compounding issues that has made the voter so much more aware this cycle, so much more educated, therefore, because they've had to go and figure this stuff out on their own. And this is why I think the Biden impact, it's not just going to be top of the ticket. It's going to trickle down to those Senate seats. The House seats are a jump ball, and these local races, like, it's all mattering so, so much more.
Are Republicans putting forward any policies or messaging that speaks to those younger people, young parents?
Yes, I think so. I think you've seen the right come out and talk about how you don't want to start the habitual welfare system over and over and over again, right? You don't want someone that's 21 going on welfare right away. Let's encourage them to work, have wraparound care if they're a young single mom, if the dad's out of the picture and they chose life. You're seeing, I think, Republicans do a better job about having more holistic and compassionate conversations for women in particular, but I do think men as well. And I think part of this is just the embrace that the right has had over the working class. And that evolution over the last 6 years, I think, has actually brought better discussion about welfare reform. It's brought better discussion about pro-life bills and pregnancy resource centers and wraparound care for families. Childcare costs are in the middle of that. And I like it best when the Republicans talk kind of holistically like that, because again, voters don't make these decisions in silos.
It's interesting. I was noticing last week how I know that the left in the Biden administration, Biden campaign, intends to run a lot on the issue of abortion. And they might not talk about it all the time, although Kamala Harris is out there a lot, but she doesn't make a lot of big news or headlines on that front. But the way that the messaging against Republicans on abortion is out there in little bits and pieces, it's pretty interesting. I saw it on 3 different op-eds last week in the Washington Post. There's little bits and pieces here and there, like an ad popped up for something that I was looking up on. It was actually a yoga video on YouTube, and it came up and it was about abortion messaging. And so that is certainly on their minds. And I think you make a good point that the Republicans do have a way to talk about it if they choose to, but that will be a battle point. All right, we will be right back with segment 3 of Perino on Politics. And welcome back to Perino on Politics. Jessica, you could talk about anything you want here. I like to ask people, what are the smart people I admire, like you, looking at that I might be missing or paying attention to that should be higher up on my radar?
So my big thing right now to focus on is the Senate map. If you look at what is at stake this cycle versus the next cycle, this is really the GOP's opportunity to build out a durable Senate majority. Regardless of what happens with the presidency and regardless of the jump ball in the House, we know we need a GOP majority in the Senate because that is going to be the insurance policy for America when it comes to cabinet positions, nominations, potentially another Supreme Court fight in the next 4 years. And so I think you're going to see a lot of focus on the pickup opportunities. Now, Manchin made it an even game, right? If everything goes well.
Since this is 30,000 foot level, let's take it back up. And I know you mean when you say Joe Manchin, but just so that everybody knows out there that are listening, so Joe Manchin is the Democratic senator from West Virginia, was popular in West Virginia as governor, has been in the Senate, is no longer popular there, and he decided not to run again. So West Virginia could be a pickup for the Republicans.
And it's almost surely to be a pickup, which would then bring the GOP versus Democratic majority in the Senate even. So then you start looking deeper into the map and you look at a state like Montana, a state that Trump previously won by 25 points. John Tester, a Democrat in name only, very liberal, voted against a huge guns bill against the interests of Montanans. I think he is ripe for the flipping, right? This is a seat that I think Republicans can target.
Do you think that the Republicans will have a nasty primary there, though?
Potentially. We'll know that in the next 3 weeks. Right now, you already have Tim Sheehy, who's announced he's raising good money. He's getting out across the state. Matt Rosendale, who's a congressman from Montana, is rumored to jump into the race. He hasn't done it yet. If he does, then that does set up a head-to-head primary that doesn't end until June, which is unfortunate because that's a lot of time to spend money against Republican when we could be focused exclusively on Tester. But Montana is also a state, Dana, that has a really high turnout rate. So when you look at the kind of big things that the Republican Party needs to get right this cycle when it comes to ballot harvesting and ballot chasing and the actual election operations, Montana's a good state for it because it's legal to ballot harvest. So all this talk about, are we going to do the tactical things that are needed to win? They actually can be tested in a state like Montana. High turnout, the ability to register voters, all those new people that have moved in, and then actually do ballot harvesting. So I'm keeping an eye on Montana for those kind of tactical, operational reasons. And then you look at Ohio, you look at Pennsylvania. Ohio, Sherrod Brown, again, Democrat, huge implications for Senate banking.
But he's been in the Senate forever.
Yeah, and the truth is, not to be disrespectful, what has he done? He's not really a Democratic senator that people associate with a big policy victory. Ohio's also a state that Trump won by 8 points last time. The Democrats know that Sherrod Brown is very unpopular. They're going to run a number of ballot initiatives to try to drive their own turnout out to combat the fact that Trump won it and no one knows who Brown is or what he's done or what he's accomplished. So I'd keep an eye on Ohio. Pennsylvania is an interesting one. That's probably third on my radar. It's a state that Trump lost very narrowly to Biden. You have a lot of lessons learned coming out of the McCormick-Oz primary last cycle, which then, as we all know, ushered in Senator Fetterman, who's now some days acting like a Republican, but he's certainly caucusing and voting with the Democrats. But Pennsylvania, I'd keep an eye on too, because I think Democrats want to prove that Pennsylvania is a blue state. And I don't think Republicans will let them prove that this cycle.
So Dave McCormick is the Republican Senate candidate. He won a unanimous backing of the GOP party there, which was not the case 2 years ago when he ran against Dr. Oz and Trump ran against Dave McCormick pretty hard back then. What's interesting is how much money the Senate Democratic Fund, or whatever that's called, DSCC, is that what it's called?
Yeah, DCCC.
DCCC. So how much money they're willing to spend to try to go against Dave McCormick? Isn't it something absurd that they've already committed, $250 million?
Yeah, that's what they've announced. And they've already started buying television reservations, which is crazy to think about because it's only February, but they're actually starting to buy those television ad spots for the media buys for this fall. They're doing it in Pennsylvania and also in Montana. So if you kind of follow the money, you see that the Democrats are most concerned about those two states and really trying to go hard for Bob Casey, who's their Democrat, the Senate incumbent there in the state of Pennsylvania. So the other piece about PA is you have to look at the impact that I think energy and oil in particular is going to have.
I'm obsessed with the liquefied natural gas ban that the Biden administration put forward. Both Senator Bob Casey and John Fetterman, Democrats in Pennsylvania, and Sherrod Brown in Ohio, plus many other Democrats, are just completely furious with the Biden administration for announcing a ban on liquefied natural gas because it makes no sense for our own energy security, and it really doesn't help jobs if you work in the energy industry. Plus, it hurts our allies who want to buy LNG from us, and it pushes them into buying energy from bad actors like Russia, Iran, China. It doesn't make any sense, except the Biden team apparently loves the TikTok kids who think LNG is bad.
Yeah, and I think they're going to express their displeasure, as they already have in the media, but I would be on the lookout for Schumer to throw a show vote to the Senate Democratic floor to give a little bit of a relief valve for those senators to say, look, we stood up against this because it would hurt our state. But right now they're hamstrung. There's nothing they can do about it, right? It was all done via an executive order. And so Biden, I think, miscalculated the impact that it would have on these Senate races that he
Do you think he'll pull it back?
Leaving in. If he gets enough pressure, but honestly, the left wing part of the base in the Democratic Party loved it and they praised him, and he's been looking for bones to throw them. And so this is why we keep going back to Democrats in disarray, because they're being pulled on these two very polarizing parts of their party, and they're having a little bit of an identity crisis over, okay, is this the Democratic Party of the 80s that can come to the table and figure out an economic bipartisan package?
Yeah, I don't
or
think
is this
so.
the squad's Democratic Party?
Hey, are you up to speed? And it's okay if you're not. And we can I'll bring it up next week with what the Biden administration wants to do to the au pair program.
Ooh, no. Are they going to put a tax on it?
No. Okay, so the au pair program is where you have young people from overseas, usually young women, who come to America. They live with a family. It's part of the State Department. You get a visa, and you could be able to go to school, and you get sort of on the path to figuring out a way if you want to be an American citizen. These are people who are often become members of the family, and it does sound fancy because it sounds French, right? Oh, you have an au pair, but it's basically like you have a nanny, you have a caretaker, whatever it is.
And they live in your home.
So
they're part of your
basically,
family.
There have been some abuses over time, and that is not good, and that has to be dealt with. But the way that the Biden administration has proposed dealing with it is this new rule at the State Department, which would basically decimate the au pair program and take away more childcare opportunities from people by it was so many absurd rules. I'm going to get it for next week, and I'll bring it up here because it sounds so elitist to say you shouldn't change the au pair program rules. But what is interesting, and the reason I thought about it on the LNG front, is that there were several moms who were getting together, and they were Democrats, saying, wait, what are you doing? This is how my husband and I, who both work full time, are able to take care of our children and raise our family. Why would you do this? Fix the program and the broken parts of it, but don't decimate it. And I always wondered if the Biden administration would sort of pull that back if they already are facing an unenthusiastic electorate. Why would you make moms, who are the swing voters in suburban districts, even more frustrated with your policies?
Yeah, that seems like a case of completely misguided priorities, too. It was like the study on the tobacco zin the other day. It's the same thing. It's like they're grasping at straws instead of really trying to tackle the issues
But it really came from the left because the union wanted to get a hold of the au pair program. That's what it was.
But why?
I know. Well, you know what? I'm bringing something up that I didn't have any information on, but it came up about.
We'll figure it out.
When we were in Iowa and New Hampshire, I was reading more about that, and I don't have children and I don't have an au pair, but I recognize that if an election is going to be this close, where you're looking at 5 battleground states and maybe 200,000 people really making a difference, and swing voters are suburban women, why would you do that?
Yeah, this honestly, it seems completely misguided. Like someone, again, got the wrong memo within the Biden administration.
Stay tuned for my update next week on the au pair program. I'm sure people are going to love it. All right, Jessica, quick pop quiz. It's very easy, though. It's multiple choice. And if you don't get the answer right, we will not hold it against you, because often I don't know the answer. Which president was the first to perform the Super Bowl coin toss in person?
Oh, man.
Was it Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan, or George H.W. Bush?
I'm going to say H.W. Bush.
Oh, you win! Also known as President Bush 41. In 2002, President Bush was accompanied by former Dallas Cowboys quarterback Roger Staubach, I hope I'm saying that correctly, at the Louisiana Superdome for the coin toss. The game was won by the New England Patriots, who beat the St. Louis Rams. And there you have it.
Love it.
Jessica Anderson, thank you so much. Everybody can follow you where? Where do they find you?
You can find me on X at Jess Anderson 2.
Excellent. Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks for having me.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.